There is a new kind of character that's emerging in our culture, and what's striking about him is that he is not hidden or withdrawn or socially excluded in the way that we might traditionally associate with loneliness. It's actually the opposite. He's hyper visible, carefully constructed, intensely curated, and yet beneath the surface, there is something that feels undeniably empty about him. If you've spent any time on TikTok recently, you've likely encountered him. There is one person who seems to embody this type of archetype or character in its most distilled form, and his name is Clavicular. Even the name feels intentional. It's detached, it's stylized, it's almost fictional. There's something gothic about it, something that evokes a kind of postmodern digital age Dracula kind of figure. Not necessarily feeding on blood, but instead on attention and admiration, and on the quiet and constant validation of the algorithm. Now, I'll be honest, when I first came across his content online, I didn't feel judgment. I didn't even feel confusion. I actually felt something much more subtle and unsettling. This kind of quiet disturbance or the quiet discomfort that people talk about when interacting with someone who feels kind of emotionally flat, performative. It felt like someone acting out trying to be a human being without actually inhabiting what makes us human. Now, I found it difficult to watch him speak without noticing what felt like that kind of emptiness and this quiet nihilism that he seems to project and even kind of like outwardly talk about so effortlessly. And with each video that I watched, that feeling really started to amplify and intensify. And he started to resemble this kind of like young man acting out a Patrick Bateman type fever dream for all the internet to see. And I remember thinking very clearly, like, what is going on here psychologically with this character? What is happening in our system and in our culture? How is this a reflection of what's going on at a macro level? Because this really is not just about one person. Clavicular is a really interesting representation for where our system and our culture is, and where our way of understanding ourselves and others, and even love itself, believe it or not, lies. So we're going to get into all that today. But before we jump in, my name is Connie Pearl. I'm a psychologist in training, and I've spent the last 15 years studying relationships, trauma, and human behavior across clinical psychology, attachment theory, cognitive behavioral therapy, psychodynamic theory, and systems frameworks. I'm also the founder of Velvet, the world's first love intelligence platform, where we use machine learning and the latest psychological research to help people love healthier and happier, to heal their past traumas, and understand their relationships on a much deeper level. What I've realized over and over again is that we don't really understand how to have relationships. We understand our feelings, we understand stories, maybe even our chemistry, but we don't understand the underlying systems and behaviors that are actually driving our relationships. That, in essence, is my overall mission: to help you understand yourself and your significant others better. Because if you don't understand what's actually happening, you can't change it. You can't choose differently, and you can't build something better. So this show is a space where I like to slow things down. Sometimes we'll look at real relationships. Sometimes we'll look at real case studies, always through a psychological lens and with the goal of bringing you the most insight possible. Because relationship health, not just love, but healthy love, is at the core of everything I care about. So whether you're here because you're curious about Clavicular, or you're here because you want to understand something more about yourself, I am so glad you're here. Now, coming back to Clavicular, there is this one moment in particular in watching his footage that stayed with me. In this clip, he's talking about potentially going on a date with a girl. Maybe drinks, maybe bowling, something normal and human. And then the question comes, wait, you're going on a date and you're not streaming it? And his response was immediate. It was almost like incredulous. And he said, that's ridiculous. Where's the ROI in that? And in that sentence, more than anything else, it really revealed the psychological structure of what we're looking at. What it suggests is that connection, even in its most basic elementary form, is no longer of value by itself to this person. It must produce something. It must be leveraged. It must generate a return. And this is where I want to slow down, because if we think about human beings at the most fundamental level, what we need to survive. It's actually quite simple. We need food, we need water, and then we need connection. Like real, authentic, genuine human connection. The real stuff. Someone who sees you, who understands you, who knows you, who hears you. Connection is not optional. It's mandatory for human beings. It's also not something that's decorative. It is the thing that organizes our emotional and psychological lives. And it's the thing that gets ripped away from prisoners as the ultimate punishment when they behave badly, right into isolation, right? Nobody wants to go there. So when we see someone whose primary framework for interacting with the world is, well, where's the ROI in that? What am I getting back? How am I standing out? How am I extracting value? We have to ask a much deeper question, because my generation, millennials, probably understand looks maxing as a way maybe to look better, so as to gain connection and get relationships, sex, attention, love. But is Gen Z and maybe even Gen Alpha, are they thinking about this in an entirely different way? Is looks maxing just another way of looking for love, or are we seeing something else entirely? Are these individuals understanding love and connection itself in a fundamentally different way? Because this is not just about Clavicular, the individual. This is about the developmental environment that produced him. We are now seeing a generation of young people who have had devices in their hands from a very early age. Their understanding of connection has been mediated and shaped and in many ways constructed through digital interaction, and this is different from previous generations. Millennials, for example, still grew up in a world where connection was primarily physical and unmediated. We had TVs that you could turn a knob on, and we rode our bikes outside. We were bored. We learned how to sit with that boredom, and we daydreamed about who we'd be and who we'd meet that would help us become it. We didn't have constant access to validation, to feedback, to an audience. And when we did get phones, it was really primarily used for texting and calling. It wasn't really about building a digital identity or performing for an algorithm, and it certainly wasn't about trying to go viral back then. So when I look at Clavicular, I really wonder, what does love mean to this person? What does connection mean to him? What does meaning itself mean to him? What is his purpose? And is it the same as what it means to previous generations? Or has something shifted so significantly in our culture that we're no longer even talking about the same thing when we use the word love? If we allow ourselves to step into this psychological exercise, and this is something that we're trained to do as clinicians, you have to fantasize about your patient and about what they're thinking about, almost as if you were them. You kind of need to get inside their head. So if Clavicular were our patient, what might we begin to see? What might he be thinking? What might he be feeling? Does he understand love as something mutual, something vulnerable, something reciprocal? Or does he understand it as admiration, as being seen, as being elevated, as increasing his value in the eyes of others? Increasing his bank account, maybe? Because to me, it does not look like love is at the center of his particular value system. It looks like admiration certainly is. Admiration and attention tied to appearance, to status, visibility, metrics. And then there's yet another layer that we have to address, which is his personality organization. And I want to be careful here because I'm not diagnosing him. I'm not in the room with him. I've never met him. But it's still useful to explore the possibilities in order to understand what we're all looking at. There are elements of his presentation that could align with narcissistic traits, with antisocial tendencies, what clinically might be referred to as antisocial personality disorder. These are individuals who do not relate to the social world in the same way that most people do. They do not prioritize connection in the same way. They are less constrained by social norms, less driven by empathy or cohesion. And there's also another thing that I have to talk about because it really overtakes me when I watch him. There is this significant emptiness in his presentation. When you watch him speak, when you look into his eyes, there is a sense that he's not fully there. And that could be related to personality structure for sure, but it could also be related to something else, which is substance use. This is someone who has openly discussed his substance use, openly discussed ingesting multiple substances over time to looks max. And this is really important given his age. The brain is still developing into your mid-20s, and exposure to substances, during that period can significantly alter emotional regulation, cognition, personality development. The fact that he's been engaging in these behaviors during critical development windows could absolutely shape how he experiences the world, how he processes connection and love, and how he constructs his identity. There are also serious allegations that are associated with his behavior involving harm to a minor, and that obviously needs to be addressed with the seriousness that it deserves. This is not simply provocative or controversial behavior, it's potentially traumatic, harmful, and it reflects something much deeper about how he understands boundaries, consent, relational responsibility. All of this is alleged. Again, I've never met him, but I'm going off what I've seen in the news and what's being reported. This symptomatology really flies a little flag here for antisocial personality disorder as a possible diagnosis. So when we take all of this together, this ROI mindset, the emphasis on optimization, the detachment, the substances, the behavioral patterns, we begin to see something more complete, not just a person, but rather a system that is organized around control, around avoiding vulnerability, and around extracting value rather than building connection. And the question that remains is whether this system can actually lead to love and relationships, or whether it protects someone from ever having to experience that. Maybe the most important question about clavicular is not really about clavicular at all. It probably is about us. It's about what we are internalizing from this culture, because we are all participating in it to some degree. So the question becomes, what are you optimizing for? Are you optimizing to be admired, or are you optimizing to be truly known, to be understood and to be loved, and to understand and to love? Because these two paths lead to very different lives. You can be admired by thousands of people, but still feel completely alone, while being known requires something much more difficult: vulnerability, proximity, time, the willingness to relinquish control. And that ultimately is really the difference between performance and connection, between visibility and intimacy, between admiration and love. How happy is clavicular, I wonder? Does he know what brings happiness? Has he been chasing the wrong rabbit all along? Or is he simply a product of this new culture being built? And is he a mirror that's being held up to us? A warning about the future, maybe? About where humanity is headed? I will leave it up to you to decide for yourself on that one. Episodes of Connie Pearl Psychology are released every month. Subscribe to my Substack, conniepearlpsychology.substack.com, to have each one delivered straight to your inbox. And if you're ready to go deeper, join Velvet, the world's first relationship intelligence platform, at velvetapp.ai. That's VLVTAPP.ai, where you can optimize your relationships, understand yourself on a deeper level, and ultimately change your life for the better. Loving smarter has never been so easy. Join Velvet at velvetapp.ai.